living outside of Eretz Yisrael. And what is that? Is that normally, you go to a restaurant or whatever, so you want to make sure that it's kosher, right? But if you go to the grocery store, if I'm stuck somewhere without any kosher food, as long as there's a produce store, I'm not going to starve because I could buy all the produce I want, right? And there'll be no issue because produce doesn't come from animals, and you don't have to worry that somehow it was what's it called? That it could be possibly not kosher. It's 100% kosher. You don't need a Hershel. You don't need a certification. 100%. You don't have to worry about fruits and vegetables. When you go to Eretz Yisrael, though, it's not the case. You can't just go to a produce store and buy the fruits and vegetables. Actually, I mean, in most stores today in Israel, produce stores actually have a Hershel, right? They have a Hershel, and there's a sign that's saying. And by the way, so the sign, by the way, you can't just have just a sign, and the sign hangs there, and it's valid, for 12 months from the date on the bottom. No, that sign has to be updated every day. Okay, and I saw this with my own eyes. If you wake up very early in the morning and the produce coming from the wholesaler or the farm, whatever, right, is being unloaded like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, right, and they're stocking up the shelves, so there has to be a mashgiach there, and that mashgiach has to verify that those fruits and vegetables are not tevel. And if they're coming from, say, a secular kibbutz, for example, right, no problem doing business with kibbutz, right? There are right, no problem. But if you want to make sure they're kosher, you have to make sure that it's not tevel. It was properly tithed, as they say in English. Okay, so the mashgiach has to verify that on a daily basis. He's there when the shipment comes in. He makes the verification. If it's coming from a place that is not verified that it has been properly tithed, then the mashgiach will do it right then and there. Okay, and he puts in the sign on the front of the produce store. There's a place where he could put in on a day. He slides in, a dated for that morning with his signature that all the produce has passed the kosher inspection, and you can freely now buy those fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, but they might bring in a shipment in the middle of the day.
6 years of the cycle of Shemitah. When it comes to Shemitah, you have a whole other issue, but that's very complicated. We're not going to get into it right now. Okay, so there's a whole different, area in kashrus that applies in Eretz Yisrael that many people coming from outside of Eretz Yisrael are not necessarily aware. The 12th grade girls were almost certainly not aware, right? And especially even if they did go with their family, say to Israel, even multiple times, they stayed maybe in a kosher hotel or with religious, right? So they weren't aware that wherever they were, let's say they went to their cousins who even in Beersheba, right? Well, in Beersheba, you have produce stores that have to have a Hershel if you are careful about keeping kosher in Israel. So you're at home and you're eating whatever it is, your hash browns for breakfast, right? And those potatoes were bought at the produce store. So you're not necessarily even aware that there was something involved before those potatoes were considered edible for the kosher consumer. Okay, I personally had this experience on a very personal level because when I was in Israel in yeshiva, was there for a year and a half. Our yeshiva was actually in the old city of Yerushalayim. So I spent a year and a half studying in the upstairs of the Tzemach Tzedek Shul in the old city of Yerushalayim. Now, for the midday meal, which is the main meal in Israel, the midday meal, we did not dorm in the old city. We dormed, there's a Chabad yeshiva in the new Yerushalayim, I guess you call it, called the Teres Emes, and we actually dormed in the dormitory of Teres Emes. So yeshiva, Rehov Yirmiyahu, if you like, that becomes Rehov Bar Ilan. It's a main street in Yerushalayim. The building is still there. I just saw it when last time I was in Israel, walked right by it. Although the whole neighborhood has changed drastically. It used to be it was a busy street, quiet neighborhood. That means there were a lot of traffic on the street, Bar Ilan, right? Because it actually begins at the entrance of Yerushalayim, right? And then it becomes Rehov Yirmiyahu, then Rehov Bar Ilan. Very busy street, but it was a quiet neighborhood. As a matter of fact, right across from our yeshiva was a big, vast area of a walled-in area, which was a former army base. Actually, technically, it was still an army base. It was an army base, yet from the British mandate. I think the British army used it, right? It was called Machane Schneller, right? And Machane Schneller was pretty much an abandoned army base. There were still a few buildings that were the IDF was still using. I know that because I would go put on fill-in with people there, and it was a deserted place. Well, it has since been commercialized. Big high-rises, big fancy high-rises. So the area that what I remember as being a quiet area has become now that you can hardly walk down the sidewalk. I actually walked with my wife, and it was like, wow. I said, you can't walk down the sidewalk. There's ladies pushing the carriages and the kids and families and so on and so forth. we specifically walked. We went to meet our Mechutanim, Bunim's parents, who lived not far from Teres Emes, just a little bit down the street. So we walked actually from the train station. We walked, and I figured it's going to be a nice walk, but it was a nice walk. It was a beautiful walk, but it was something that I didn't expect. The amount of pedestrians and the amounts of people walking on the sidewalks was not what I remembered from my good old days in yeshiva. But in any case, we would go early in the morning. We would go to yeshiva. There would actually be two taxis waiting for us in front of the yeshiva Teres Emes, two taxis to take our whole group at exactly 6:40 or 6:45. We started Seder, started at 7 o'clock in the morning. And after Chassidus, we would daven, and then after davening is breakfast. Now, like I started to say, the main meal would come from the kitchen at Teres Emes. So they would bring it over during the day, and then whenever we would eat, what we call here lunch, which is really the main meal in Israel. So they would bring it over to from the kitchen of Teres Emes. But what did we do for breakfast? For breakfast, so this is back in we're talking about in the 70s, the late 70s, right? 1978, 1979. The Jewish quarter in the old city wasn't fully settled yet, right? And there were no Jewish stores yet. So the only store that was open close to our yeshiva was down, you walked down Rehov Chabad or Rehov HaYehudim, and there was an Arab store, right? Very nice, wonderful, right? But that's where we used to buy our breakfast. And there they stocked, the yogurts, whatever, from Tenuva and stuff like that. But we would buy also some from fruits and vegetables, right? Well, whatever. We used to make breakfast. Everybody would make their own breakfast. So some guys would like to cut up a salad, whatever it may be. What we had to do before breakfast is, like we used to take turns, who goes to the store. Somebody takes the orders, goes to the store, while everybody else is finishing up davening, and then they come and then they bring you whatever you ordered. You ordered the, tomato and a cucumber, to cut up with your yogurt or whatever, right? But you had to first undo it from its tevel status, because one thing we knew for sure, or maybe we even verified, was that the Arab owner of the store did not have a mashgiach, number one, for his produce. And he was probably buying it from like somewhere, maybe it could have even been coming from Jordan or been coming, right? And that's a problem. Even if it's coming from Jordan, it's a problem as far as tevel, as far as truma. So we had to learn how to do it ourselves, right? So I became an expert. I'm personally an expert. And it actually came to use because like Giant Eagle right here in Squirrel Hill once had this beautiful display of tomatoes with a really big, nice, beautiful sign that was meant to appeal to the Jewish community of Squirrel Hill. tomatoes from kibbutz, whatever, in Israel. I walk in and I see that. I say, oh, this is a problem, because I knew that there will be some people who are going to be very happy, and they're going to want to support Israel. They're going to buy these tomatoes and not realize that they are most likely tevel. Okay. Well, the word went out. I don't know. I guess maybe email was already being used in the 80s, but word went out, and I ended up having to people who already bought, whether it was tomatoes or maybe grapefruits is also a very common fruit that they sell here in America coming from Israel. You need to know how to be mafresh the truma and meiser, how to separate the truma and meiser. So if anybody wants, I could teach them how to do it. It's actually printed in the back of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Maybe not the American versions, but definitely the Israeli versions. You have the procedure for separating the Truma and Meiser to remove the prohibited status of tevel from the produce that you buy. Okay. All of this begins when the Jews cross over the Yarden and they settled the land of Eretz Yisrael. Okay. There are certain, and there are other mitzvahs that have to do with the produce of the land, all connected somewhat to Truma and Meiser. Then there's also the issue of Chadash. Chadash is, that actually technically applies even outside of Eretz Yisrael, but that's another whole different discussion. So it doesn't necessarily, I think Chadash doesn't start immediately, but in any case, once they conquered and settled the land, now the land has a whole new status. It's called Eretz Kodesh, and it has its whole array, you could write a whole Shulchan Aruch, and indeed many have of the laws that are unique, and they apply to the land of Israel. Okay, so here we are, already last week, Parshas Pinchas. We're getting closer. We're mamish getting close to Eretz Yisrael. We're standing already on the banks. In this week's parsha, we made it we're camping out on the banks of the Jordan River. And this is a good time where, so first we find that the last week that the family that only had the girls, the Bnei Slavchot, right? They came to Moshe with a complaint. They said, "Listen, we're going into Eretz Yisrael. I know that there's a mitzvah of how to. I mean, have to divide up the land." And they were worried that they're going to be excluded, and that's where last week already Hashem says, "Don't worry," and He gave him the laws of inheritance, which a father who does not have sons, then the inheritance then goes to the daughters. Okay, but then there's also the instruction from Hashem to Moshe Rabbeinu as how exactly, what is this procedure going to be when it comes to dividing up the land of Eretz Yisrael? Okay, and I mention it again today for two reasons. Because first of all, it's discussed again in Parshas Maasei, right? And specifically, what we interestingly find in the mitzvah of dividing up the land, that the Torah uses three different procedures which do not seem to whatever, they don't align because they're all different, right? And yet all three are to be used in the process of dividing up the land of Eretz Yisrael, okay? And that's already from last week, Parshas Pinchas, and then some of it is mentioned again in this week in Parshas Maasei. What is it? Hashem tells Moshe that it should be done ach b'goyrel. It should be done by goyrel. Goyrel means by lots, right? That's how you're going to divide up the land. It also will be done al pi Hashem according to Ruach HaKodesh, okay? And then we find L'Rav Tarbe V'Lama'a Tamit, which is also again repeated in this week's Parsha, Parshas Maasei. It's a very exciting time, by the way. It's a very exciting time because we're finishing Chumash Bamidbar, right? And we all know, and we've heard it a million times, that to the point that when we hear it, it doesn't really resonate anymore. And that is what the Alter Rebbe said, you have to live with the Parsha. Okay? So let me tell you, living with the Parsha means that we're now standing on the banks of the Jordan, getting ready to go into Eretz Yisrael, right? And then what kind of really gets your heart pumping a little bit with some excitement is that because we already been through this last year, right? That in Mirz Hashem, next week we're going to start Chumash Devarim. What's going to happen in Chumash Devarim? We're going to have a 5-week Farbrengen. Moshe Rabbeinu is going to start Farbrengen, and he's getting the Yidden ready to go across the Eretz Yisrael. So now we're giving some of the technical instruction of how to divide up the land. Next week, Moshe Rabbeinu is going to make a big Farbrengen, which they're on the banks of the Jordan, and this is on the Chodesh Shvat, as the first pasuk next week in Devarim is going to tell us, and then the whole Chumash Devarim is basically Moshe Rabbeinu speaking to us, to Bnei Yisrael, right? So all the way until we finish the Torah on Sukkot is going to be, and the time span was from Chodesh Shvat until the 7th day of Adar, which is about 5 weeks plus a day or two, right? And basically, that's what it is. Okay, so when you really pay attention to what the Alter Rebbe said in Daf Leb Mitzvot, you have to feel we're now standing by the Jordan. We're about to cross the Jordan into the land of Israel, right? And next week we're all excited because next week's going to start the big Farbrengen, right? And we're going to have this Farbrengen with Moshe Rabbeinu, even though it spanned 5 weeks, but we're going to be spending all the way up until Sukkot. We're going to be spent reading about the Farbrengen that took place. Okay, that's the Chumash of the Devarim that's coming up. But back to the subject. Last week and this week we have these specific instructions of how Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu with regard to how to divide up the land. We find these 3 terms that it should be done with Gairel, it should be done with Ruach HaKodesh, and it should be done L'Rav Tamid, that it should be done in a very pragmatic system where you divide it up by need. So if you have a bigger shevet, they get more land. If you have a smaller shevet, they get less land. And you use a pragmatic and a system which you'll end up with a equal division, so to speak, a fair and equal division of the land of Eretz Yisrael. Equal meaning each to their need, depending on what the needs of that shevet. It was all basically attended to and taken care of. Okay. Well, that doesn't seem to jive exactly with big Geirel. Geirel means lots. Lots means you don't know where you're going to end up. That doesn't sound very pragmatic means of dividing up the land of Israel. And then we have also the Ruach HaKodesh, that it was done by some kind of divine inspiration. Again, the divine inspiration could end up actually being, Hashem, or deciding, the best way of dividing up the land, but it's not a pragmatic, systematic process either. It's just based on, whatever Hashem says. Now, Rashi already last week described what happened, okay? And the way Rashi describes it, it covers all 3, okay? So this is how Rashi describes what happened. So the first thing Moshe Rabbeinu did was he created a Geirel system. Now, how does a Geirel work? So he had the names of the 12 Shvatim on 12 little cards or pieces of paper or whatever they used, right? And then they divided up the land into 12 portions. Now, this is the part that I don't understand exactly, because when they had to put that into the Geirel, how exactly did they know how to create 12 different partition Eretz Yisrael into 12 pieces? So I don't know. but this is what happened. Rashi says, yeah, 12, they partitioned it into 12, the divisions of the land. And then they put into the other pot, or whatever you want to call it, the 12 names of the Shvatim, right? And then they would put the hand in and take out a Shevet's name, right? And then they would take out the name of the division. And there you go. This Shevet, the lottery came out that this is what you get, okay? The way Rashi explains the Ruach HaKodesh element there was that the girl itself kind of announced this Shevet gets this. So you didn't have to look. As soon as it was taken out, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit, this Holy Spirit, basically kind of pronounced of which the Shevet, how they matched up with which portion of Bnei Yisrael. And then, as far as the Rav Tarbe V'Lamat Tamid, the very logical, equalitarian, or whatever you want to call it, process, where it's all fair and divided according to need, it turned out, here there's actually a Machlekes, Rashi and the Ramban, whatever, but the way Rashi says is that it just turned out that the ones who had maybe that's when they put in the things, they already, I don't know. But the bottom line is that we have these three different procedures all into one, even though on the surface, some of them don't seem to align exactly with the other. A girl means that there's no pragmatic, considerations being taken. Whatever it ends up being, that's what it is. And then you go to the other extreme, where the Torah says specifically that it should be done according to need, based on the population, and so on and so forth, right? Which seems to be just the opposite. So Rashi has this interesting way, of describing what took place, so it kind of covers all three. Okay, that's wonderful. When you're learning Chumash with Rashi and Baruch Hashem, you've learned the portion of the week, whether it's Chitas or whatever. Okay, but then along comes Chassidus. So the first thing, and I'm referring specifically to a maimer from the Rebbe, which is actually on the pasuk Ach Bagoiro. Even though you have to do it l'rav, tarbe, v'lama, tamit, the pasuk itself says, but at the same time, it also has to be done through the lottery, right? Okay. Well, guess what? This maimer was said by the Rebbe in Tafshin Lamed Hey in 1975. So it was in the summer of 1975, I guess on Pashas Pinchas of that summer. I think it was actually on the Shabbos, because no, it was it the Shabbos? Was it my birthday? I don't remember. Maybe the week before my birthday. Okay. No, it was no. I'm sorry. This maimer was actually said in the middle of the week. It was in the middle of the week. There was a Fabrengen, and this maimer was said Ach Ba'Goyr. Okay. Now, what was unique, and I have some very, very, nostalgic memories, was when the Rebbe would say a maimer, and the Rebbe would very often say a maimarim. There are thousands of maimarim from the Rebbe. Thousands? No, maybe hundreds, definitely hundreds, easily hundreds. You can be counted very easily, because I actually have the set, of all of the Maimarim that the Rebbe said. I never bothered to count, but it's a set. It's a set of Maimarim, of all the Maimarim that the Rebbe said. Now, in this set, everything's there, all the Maimarim. But of those Maimarim, the majority of them were never published officially. So what we have, and these volumes of Maimarim are the transcripts of every single Maimar. But there also were, amongst those Maimarim, there were the Maimarim that the Rebbe actually edited and approved for official, put a stamp on it as an official publication of a Maimar from the Rebbe. That's called a Maimer Muga. Now, before this set of all the Maimarim came out, already a long time ago, like even before Gimel Tammuz even it started. But after Gimel Tammuz, you had the full set, and it's basically 4 books, only 4 books. And in these 4 books, you have every maimer that Rebbe said from the beginning of his leadership in 1950 all the way through Nun Beis, all the way to Gimel Tammuz, right? So in the span of all of those years, of the 42 years, 44 years, but 42 years that the Rebbe was bringing and saying Maimorim, right? So you have all of the Maimorim that the Rebbe edited for official publication. This new set is not just the one. That's only 4 svarim, right? But then we have the much bigger set, which basically is all of the Maimorim that the Rebbe ever said, because it includes even those Maimorim for which there are transcripts. Now, this process of printing a maimer, that publishing a maimer, an official maimer, for the first almost 20 years, that means from 1950 to 1970, you could count on 2 hands. In other words, it was not a common thing for the Rebbe to officially publish a maimer. Okay. So you're going from 1950, the very first maimer that the Rebbe said on Yud Shvat of 1951, actually, the year that he officially assumed, the position of being the Rebbe after a year passed from the passing of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So this maimer, the first maimer, Basi Lagani, that Rebbe said, was pretty much almost immediately, it was edited and officially given out as an official publication from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So that first maimer, and then the next maimer, which was a couple of days later, and then from that point on, it became very sporadic, very sporadic. There is a very, a very down-to-earth explanation for that, and that was because the Rebbe just said that he didn't have the time, right? So even the ones that the Rebbe did publish, right, he first instructed that it should be made into a transcript, and then the Rebbe would edit the transcript, right? So this is where the Rebbe himself, the Chassidim were actually, every time the Rebbe said a maimer, the Chassidim were asking for the Rebbe to publish it, right? And the Rebbe then told, I think he told it first to Rabbi Khan, who was the head of the transcribers, right? What's called the Manichim, the Chayzim, the Manichim. But so Rabbi Khan, was asking the Rebbe, he's giving in the transcripts and waiting for the Rebbe to edit them so that they can go ahead and publish. And what happened is that these transcripts were staying in the Rebbe's room and they were not being edited. So it was because of time constriction. The Rebbe said he just doesn't have the time for it. Okay, that's what the Rebbe said. But nonetheless, there were occasions where the maimer was published, right? But it was sporadic, very sporadic. And every time that a maimer was actually published was a big major simcha. It was like what's it called? Like Simchas Torah in 770, right? It was a special occasion. Usually they would come out like before Shabbos. Now, up until like into the 80s, the maimarim that were being published were, when the Rebbe said a maimer, immediately they would prepare a transcript, and then they would immediately, as quickly as possible, they would submit it for the Rebbe's approval, and then the Rebbe would, if he would approve it on those occasions that he did, it was then published as an official maimer, and that was usually within days of the Rebbe having said the maimer. Okay? I'm saying this as opposed to what happened in the the end of the 80s and the 90s. Basically, after there was a point where the Rebbe actually stopped saying Maimar. Okay? There were some exceptions. It was what's it called? If you look, it coincided with the issue with the Svarim and so on and so forth, but whatever. But what happened then was that all of a sudden, almost for about 4 years, or even more actually, from the 80s. Some point in the 80s until 1992, when the Rebbe had the stroke, there was a how do you say a flow like sometimes it was like week after week a mimer was being published. Now these mimerim were not mimerim that were being published based on a mimer that the Rebbe had just said. No, what they would do is they would take the transcripts of mimerim that were said years before, and they would prepare them in the way that they felt would give the Rebbe the least amount of work as far as editing. And after a while, they kind of learned the technique of how the Rebbe's, his system and his style, so to speak, to whatever degree you could say. And the Rebbe would then the Rebbe was actually wanted it that way. He asked for it. He said, before you send in the transcript, try to make an effort that there should be the least amount of editing required. So at some point they got the hang of it, right? And in this way, what happened is that for those years that the Rebbe is no longer saying Maimarim, all of a sudden what's the word? It was like a wave, so to speak, of Maimarim being published based on the transcripts that were being redone and submitted again to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would then would spend a lot less time, maybe 2 days or 3 days or whatever, because sometimes it would go in. Usually it was a 3 in and out process. They would give the original transcript, it would come out with the Rebbe's notations and rearranging sometimes. They would redo it according to the Rebbe's notations. It went in for a second time, and then it came out after the second time with again, and usually, hopefully by the third time, the Rebbe would sign off on it and it would be officially published. But these memorim are memorim that were said in the past, right? And so it became a new thing. The Rebbe wasn't saying memorim, but the Rebbe was editing memorim. Prior to that, though, I'm going to say, like, for the first 20 years, that would be from Tafshin Yud Aleph until Tafshin Lamed. It was published Maimarim were few and far in between. Okay? When I came to Yeshiva in Tafshin Lamed Aleph, the frequency of Maimarim being published kind of like was somewhat, increased. So in my days, my yeshiva days, it was not so uncommon, but still, it wasn't anything close to the way these Amorim were being published, the frequency and the that the Amorim were being published, in this later 80s. So whenever a Maimon did come out, it was very exciting. It was a very exciting thing, right? So I remember one week, and here I'm a bacher, I'm a young bacher, I'm a teenager. I didn't become 20 until the second half of the 70s. Okay, but I remember the excitement was amazing. It was, you could feel it, you felt it in the air. So I remember one specific Shabbos. It was Shabbos morning. A mimer had just come out. Rabbi would teach the mimer 3 times. Friday night after Kabbalah Shabbos, and then Shabbos morning before Shachis, and then the third time he would have like a public shiur downstairs in 770, and he would teach the mimer one more time before Mincha. So like 3 times. A new mimer, that meant that 3 times Rabbi was going to teach it, right? So I was sitting upstairs in 770, not in the big room, but in the second room, okay? And I was learning the new mimer that came out. Right, there was an elderly chassid sitting at that table. You know that room, Chaim, right? The Cheder Sheni, right? Yisroel Karp, I'm sure you know that room. The second room of the upstairs of 770. And I'm learning the Maimer. And again, I don't remember which one it was. I think it was one of the Tzion B'Mishpat Tipada, again, also that the Rebbe published in the 1970s. Actually, at that point, it was still, with the Rebbe did publish a Maimer, it was a Maimer that had been said, within the last couple days. Okay? Either Shabbos or whatever. so the elderly, and I know who it was, I could say his name, but he was sitting next to me, and he was already older, and he wasn't able. He was like somewhat blind. He couldn't read, right? But he felt in the air something was going on, right? So he knew that a new mimer was just published, right? But he couldn't read it, right? Because he wasn't able to read. And I'm sitting at the table, and he notices me, and he says, "Was lernst du?" So I said, "I'm learning the mimer." So tut mir a table, sagte, "Please, kannst du bitte lernen von mir the mimer?" He told me in Yiddish, "Can you read it for me?" Wow. So that's what I did. You know what I mean? So he's sitting next to me, and I'm Pasha reading the mimer so that he could be able to also be part of all that excitement. So that's an experience that I had that gives you a little bit of an idea of what the environment was when a new mimer would come out, right? Like he was begging me, like didn't want to bother a bacher sitting and learning, right? Bitte, please, please, can you read the mimer for me? Read the mimer for me, which I obliged, of course, and I read the mimer for him. Okay. This particular mimer, the mimer that addresses the three ways that Eretz Yisrael was meant to be divided up, right? That mimer, I was there when the mimer was said, and I was there when the mimer was published, right? And it's a very exciting mimer because just the fact that I have these memories, this personal connection to when that mimer actually was published. And I learned the mimer, and one of the things, I'm kind of like disappointed with myself is that, wow, I had such a limited understanding of Hasidus when I was Tafshin Lamed. Hey, oh boy, I was already 18 years old, right? I should have known better, 18. And I'm looking at the mimer, and I'm reading parts of the mimer, like now, or since then, and again, before this shiur, and I'm looking at parts of the mimer, and I'm remembering how we kind of digested it then, right? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Baruch Hashem, 30, 40, 50 years of learning Chassidus actually has some kind of an effect, right? You actually begin to have more of a handle. And I'm comparing, it happens often with me, because this is a mimer that I lived with that mimer when it was given out. And now when I'm learning it, from a different perspective, as, an alter mensch, I'm an old man already, I find it very interesting that I see certain insights that or even some basic understanding even of the mimer that I remember at the time I didn't see it necessarily that way. Okay, so it's just a little interesting lesson that over time, if you actually spend time exercising something, and in this case it will be the exercise of studying Chassidus and studying the Rebbe's Memorim, don't think that because at the time you thought that you were Mr. Who knows what and you know everything, right? As a teenager, I mean, I wasn't 11 years old, I wasn't 14 years old, I was 18, or maybe I already turned 19, right? Oh, yeah, at that point, I certainly thought of myself as a master of Chassidus, right? Okay. And then I look back and I see, oh boy, you were far, far from a master, because Baruch Hashem, having learned Chassidus over, since then, well, how many years would that be? From this is 1975, and now we're going on whatever. We're talking about quite some time, right? Baruch Hashem, what can I say? I'm thankful for the fact that over the years, my insight, the depth, and so on and so forth, still has a long way to go. But Baruch Hashem, I'm still young, right? But I'm kind of like encouraged by the fact, knowing that if I keep on learning Chassidus, in 50 years from now, I'm going to see it in a whole new light than I'm even seeing it now, right? Compared to the way I saw it when the mimer was first published. Okay. So let me tell you about this mimer and its relevance to the current events. The world is such a false place. It's such a big lie. And indeed, when the Zohar calls this world, the world of Asiya, the physical world, the world that we're stuck in and the world that we live in, right? Where we are very restricted on seeing the truth, right? But yet we learn Torah and we accept the truth, whether we see them or not, right? Because the Torah is only telling us the truth, right? But then you look out the world and you see that now I understand why the Zohar calls this world a Alma de Shikra, which is Aramaic for a Olam Shel Sheker. It's a world of lies, okay? If you learn, we learn at the Parsha, we read it every year, and this week we read this Parsha. And then as Chassidim, we make sure that every day, we learn Chitas. And we follow what the Alter Rebbe is telling us, right, about living with that Parsha. And you have this lie that somehow the Jews are not connected to that land. What do you mean I'm connected to that land? Today, right now, I'm standing on the banks of the Jordan, right? And I'm listening to Moshe and his instructions about what to do, right? That was 3,000 years ago. And to Jews, this is not ancient history. Every Jew feels that he crossed that Yarden and he inherited that land, because that's the truth. It's the absolute truth. And it's not some kind of a vague, somewhat some vague concept. It's not abstract. We live it. Every year we live. And you're going to tell me that the Jews are not indigenous to the land of Israel? Hello? We're indigenous because I'm there. I crossed the Yarden. I'm going into the Yarden. Every year, once a year, I cross the Yarden. And before I cross, I spend the rest of my summer listening to my Shabbat's Farbrengen. We're doing it. We're living it every single year. And you mamish, you're part of it. You literally feel in these weeks, you mamish feel like you're at the banks of the Jordan River. And then you cross over the Jordan, before you go, right? Then you go into Nevi'im at the Yisroel and so on and so forth. But before you get there, you get weeks. How many weeks are from now to Sukkot? Weeks of listening to Moshe Rabbeinu instruct us and encourage us and prepare us for becoming the indigenous people of the land of Israel. Okay, so the lies that are out there, it's not a historical truth. It's a truth that we relive literally every single year when we cross over the Yarden together with the Jews in that week and the Parsha of that week. Mamish. Okay. I'm getting excited about this because I'm it's like, to me, it's like it's so obvious. Like, what kind of narishkeit? You don't even know what you're talking about. You're going to tell me? I said, it's my man. It's right. I'm married. As a matter of fact, I'm now listening to the Farbrengen of Moshe. Well, next week, we're going to start hearing a Farbrengen, and it's going to prepare us for going into that land, right? So we're going into that land. It wasn't 3,000 years ago. We relive it literally for all of those 3,000 years. Jews have been reliving this experience for 3,000 years, and just keep your mouth shut, you idiots. I don't care you're the UN or you were here. I mean, the people who hate us, right? But when Biden, the president of our area, and it's not him only, it's everybody. Ceasefire. Shut up, will you? Okay, can you just keep your mouth shut? What do you mean? Whatever happened to surrender? Do you ever hear the word surrender? No, United States and the rest of the world forgot the word surrender a long time ago. But when somebody starts a war with you and they massacre more than 1,000 of your people, the end of that story is surrender, not ceasefire, not peace, not negotiations. Surrender. Take the word, ceasefire, peace, settlement, and just cancel it. Get that word out of the conversation. The truth is that it's our land. It always was our land. It's not something about history. It's a current truth, right? Where we all experience it literally. And don't tell me about making negotiations. Negotiations about what? They kidnap people, right? Oh, let's make a hostage deal. Deal? What kind of deal? You kidnapped my baby, and I'm gonna make a deal with you? Like, really? You kidnapped my baby, and let's work out a deal. Like the stupidity. It's crazy, right? It's sheker. It's false. Excuse me for getting excited. I had a little extra coffee today. But that's the truth. That is the absolute truth. Anyway, what happened today at this shiur is that we didn't get to to explaining the three different ways of inheriting the land, the way it manifests itself in our own avodah, right? And in the this Maimer, Ach Begerel, the Rebbe makes a very interesting point. He says, whatever you read about in the Torah, about the land of Israel, can also be read as a narrative about the soul of the Jewish person. You hear that? So let that be the lesson of today's lesson without getting into details. Maybe next week we'll get into the details. But this is such an important thing, the Rebbe says. It's based on a medrash. And the medrash, when it speaks about the Jews inheriting the land of Israel, the medrash says, listen, we all think that Hashem chose us, right? Okay, we know that. The Torah says we're the chosen people, right? The Medrash says there were two choices. He chose us, but he also chose a plot of land. The connection of Hashem to Yitzchok, because Hashem chose it. So the same way Hashem is connected to us as a people, likewise Hashem is connected to the land of Israel. It's a bechira. We usually think of one bechira, but there was actually two bechiras. He chose us, and he chose the land of Israel. Okay, says the Medrash. Hashem said, "Let the people that I've chosen, let them come and inherit the land that I chose." That's the Tanchuma. That's what the Medrash says. I made two choices, and I'm going to bring these two choices together. What does the Rebbe tell us? What does Chassidus tell us? That no, there really was one choice, right? But that one choice manifests itself in two different ways, right? Land, people. Comes the Medrash, and the Medrash says, you know what? There looks like two choices, but really, let's bring them together, because truly and ultimately, it's not two truths. It's one truth. It's one bechira. It's one choice that I made. Therefore, says the Rebbe in this Maimer, anything that you read about the land of Israel has not just some kind of a correlation, but it's directly applicable to our avodah in our avodah Hashem. Okay? And therefore, and this is what the Maimer goes on to explain, that just like Israel was divided by Goyrol, Ruach HaKodesh, and pragmatic, dividing the land, where it's going to be everybody going to get, be happy, and everybody is going to get exactly what they need, right? This corresponds, and I use the word correspond, but it's like really it's synonymous with the Jewish soul. We don't have any more time, but I guess, you know what? I'm leading up to next week's shiur. Next week's shiur, we're going to talk about the three different ways that the Jewish soul manifests itself. It manifests itself on the Goyrol level, it manifests itself on the Ruach HaKodesh level, and it will also manifest itself on a very pragmatic, logical, etc. level as well. So that is what I have to share with you for the meantime. Maybe Hashem, tune in again next week, and don't forget, Israel and Jews are not two separate entities. We are one entity. And therefore, the natural way that it should be is to get over all your falsehoods and understand that the Jews and Israel are inseparable. That's the way it's been for 3,000 years. And Heref Tzahaken Mirachainik, stop with your shtusim, your narishkeit, and so on, and let's get on with life. Okay? Yes, he is.